So it's been over 2 months since my third miscarriage, and I realized probably about 3 to 4 weeks after the miscarriage that I had become depressed. I wasn't myself. I didn't have interest in my usual things. I wasn't hungry, which is very interesting for me because I love my food and I'm very specific about the food I love, and I wasn't even wanting my macaroni and cheese, which is like my all-time favorite meal. I know, healthy. Things like that. I was noticing that I had to really focus on doing things that I know I should and I usually enjoyed. So these are all indicators that I realized, you know what, I've got to work through this, not necessarily just to get over it, but to just work through it, to identify sticking points, to talk it through, because that really helps the mind process what has happened, and to realize that the horrible thing has happened. What do I do with it? Where do I put it in my psyche? How does that change me in the future? So on and so forth. So I called and made a counseling appointment for my husband and myself through work, which is a benefit that I have through our insurance system, which I'm so grateful for. And I was embarrassed to call. As I shared in another video, I called and I was not only embarrassed, I felt ashamed, like I was weak. Even though mentally I support counseling, I've always been behind it. I have never articulated that I remember that counseling is bad, or you shouldn't do it, or you should be ashamed if you need it. Yet I felt that, so it was interesting to me about the societal pressures on that. It was very interesting. So we went to our first counseling session, and there were 4 things that immediately I realized were such a huge benefit to me. Now, am I planning to go back? Probably not, at least for now, for various reasons. And I got 4 huge benefits out of this, and I wanted to share those in case some of you were considering, do I go and talk to someone? Do I not? And I wanted to share these benefits because I didn't fully connect with our counselor, and that's one of the reasons why we're probably not going to go back, at least to her. I thought she was a great person, and it's just, you kind of, when you're sharing personal things, you want to have a connection. I'm more of an introvert. I really enjoy that one-on-one connection. And so for me, it was more than having that person to listen to my story. It's also to make a connection. And I didn't feel that connection. My husband didn't either. And it's not to say yay or nay on the counselor herself. It was just the connection. And so if and when we do go back, it will probably be to a different individual, which is fine. And even though we didn't make a good connection per se with the counselor, there were 4 immediate benefits that I was so grateful that we went. And the first one is the obvious. You have a listening ear. Especially after a month after the miscarriage, society generally anticipates that you're going to move on after a month. They don't ask about it. They don't want to know about it. And because of that, when you might be ready to start talking about it because now the emotions are there and you're trying to process through it after the numbness has worn off, no one's really ready or willing or even knowledgeable to know that you need a listening ear. And so this is just a dedicated listening ear that was really, really beneficial. And then, of course, they're trained to ask a certain leading question. So as you share your story, they ask for details or your feelings about what happened, and that's really, really, really nice, and that helped me articulate things that I wasn't able to do before. The second benefit that I really, really, really appreciated is that it's dedicated time. So my husband and I, of course, we have a little one, our boy, which was our 3rd pregnancy, because our 3rd miscarriage was our 4th pregnancy. He takes a lot of time. I'm working, my husband's working. So when we have sat down to process and talk about these things, there's generally interruptions where Micah's awake, or Micah needs some help, or he needs attention. Or if Micah's asleep, one of us will probably fall asleep because we're just that tired. Or there's other things to do around the house that are time sensitive. So it was so nice to just have dedicated time to say, okay, this 1 hour or 1.5 hours is only to talk about this. And it was huge, and I was so grateful for that. And I would recommend it to anyone who's maybe considering, because you feel depressed after a miscarriage or a loss. just to have that dedicated time is huge. And the counselor really didn't talk a lot, which is beneficial. I think that's what they're trained to do, at least in this situation. And so because of that, it was space that my husband and I were talking, doing most of the talking. And that leads into the second benefit, or the third benefit at this point. I was able to hear things from my husband's standpoint that even though we talked about things in the past, to hear him articulate it to someone else really opened my eyes to his perception, his emotions, his idea of what happened and how he processes it. I don't think I would have had that otherwise if someone hadn't been asking the questions that, of course, they were paid to do at this point, but to ask the questions that he would then have answers to and give it to a third party that I could listen to instead of being it back and forth between him and I. It's a huge benefit to see that perspective. And the fourth benefit, I was kind of scared about because I don't like to be emotional, yet I realized that this would be an emotional conversation, and so I was not looking forward to this meeting. I wasn't dreading it, but I really wasn't looking forward to it because I knew I would just be a basket case. And of course I was. As soon as I walked in and she said, "So why are you here?" I instantly started bawling. But the reality is that is why you're there. It's a safe place to be emotional, and there's not many places like that in this world. So that was a huge benefit, and there are other benefits as well, but those four were big. And so if you're considering, you realize you're depressed after a loss, if you're considering counseling, I highly recommend it, even if you don't really connect with the counselor. That to me wasn't a requirement, and it ended up not being a requirement to get benefits out of it. So I highly recommend it. If you have thoughts or questions, please leave comments. I'm always happy to give my take on it just from my experience. Just the reality is we need a community. We need a place to be able to express our emotions, to feel free with that, understanding that we just need to work through this. So let me know how your experience went or if you're considering it, and we can work through this together. Blessings.